He'll sign tomorrow. Is everything ready on your end? I stared at the message on my wife's phone in complete shock. After 40 years of marriage, Helen was conspiring with my own son-in-law to steal everything I'd built. They thought the 65-year-old architect was just a naive old man, ready to hand over his life's work and retire peacefully. They calculated every move. The fake smiles at family dinners, the art gallery investments, even Daniel's helpful legal advice about the company's sale. What they didn't know was that I had spent decades designing structures that could withstand any storm, and I wasn't about to let mine collapse without a fight. They underestimated the man who had stared down city planners and union bosses. They forgot that an architect doesn't just build, he also knows exactly how to demolish. So I hired a private investigator and listed my daughter as a secret ally, and began constructing the most important blueprint of my life, their complete destruction. But what I discovered about their conspiracy was far worse than I ever imagined, and what I did next would leave them begging for mercy that would never come. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The cold lash of a late October wind rattled the plate glass window of my study, a sound I'd known for 30 years in this house. Outside, the lights of Chicago's Gold Coast began to glitter against a bruised twilight sky. Inside, there was only the warm glow of the lamp on my mahogany desk, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built to exact specifications. The smell of old paper and worn leather filled the air, a scent more comforting to me than any cologne. My life's work was contained in this room, captured in the clean lines of the cantilevered shelves and the framed blueprints on the walls. Before me, the final draft of the acquisition agreement lay open on the IMAX screen. Morgan and Associates, the firm I had started with nothing but a drafting table, and a belief in the integrity of a well-placed line, was being sold. It was my masterpiece, my legacy, and tomorrow I would sign it over for a sum that would guarantee security for generations. At 65, I felt no sadness, only a profound sense of completion. The structure was sound. The foundation was solid. Retirement felt less like an ending, and more like walking into a sunlit atrium of my own design. The soft click of the door brought me back from my thoughts. Helen stood in the doorway holding 2 glasses of Cabernet, her smile as warm and familiar as the room itself. She moved with an easy grace that 40 years of marriage had not diminished, placing a glass beside my keyboard without a single drop spilled. "Still admiring your handiwork, my love?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. "Just reading the fine print one last time," I said, leaning back as she rested a hand on my shoulder. Her fingers traced the spine of a leather-bound book on the shelf beside me, a casual, familiar gesture. "It's done, Helen. Everything we worked for." "I know," she said, her eyes shining. "Soon it will be nothing but Italy and art galleries, and spoiling our grandson." She leaned in and kissed my temple. Her perfume was a subtle floral scent I'd loved since college. Laura called. "She and Daniel are excited for Thanksgiving. Daniel is especially proud of you." I smiled. My son-in-law, the sharp corporate lawyer, had been an invaluable source of advice. She gave my shoulder a final squeeze and turned to leave. "Don't work too late. Our future is waiting." As she walked out, my eyes caught her quick glance, back at the IMAX screen, a flicker of an expression that was just a fraction too long to be casual curiosity. But then it was gone, and she was gone, and I was alone again with the document that held my entire past. I turned back to the screen, ready to close the file, when the display blinked. A notification banner slid into view at the top corner, a feature of the synchronized accounts Helen and I shared. It was an iMessage from Daniel. My eyes scanned the preview. "He'll sign tomorrow. Is everything ready on your end?" Before I could process the sterile, oddly conspiratorial tone, another banner appeared beneath it. This one was from a Marcus Thorne. "The painting is hung. Can't wait to celebrate with you." A cold dread, foreign and unwelcome, crept up my spine. Marcus Thorne was the owner of that trendy art gallery Helen had been frequenting. The investment piece she'd insisted we buy now hung in our living room. My fingers felt clumsy as I moved the mouse, the cursor hovering over the green message icon in the dock. It was a violation of privacy. It was wrong. But the architect in me, the man who had to know if there was a flaw in the design, took over. I clicked. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of work, a family built brick by brick. And in 40 seconds of scrolling, I watched the entire structure collapse into dust. The words on the screen blurred, the pixels dissolving into meaningless points of light. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears, drowning out the sound of the wind outside. My hand, still resting on the mouse, was completely numb. It felt like I was looking at a blueprint for a building that had already collapsed around me, a structure I had foolishly believed was indestructible. I closed my eyes, but the messages were burned onto the inside of my eyelids. He'll sign tomorrow. The painting is hung. Celebrate. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I slammed the MacBook shut with a sharp crack that echoed in the silence. The sound was violent, final. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner inside a cage of my own making. Helen appeared in the doorway again, wrapped in her silk robe. "Is everything all right, dear?" I heard a noise. I forced myself to turn to compose my face into a mask of weary professionalism. It was the hardest piece of architecture I had ever designed. "Just dropped a book," I lied. The words tasted like ash. "Finished up. I'm coming now." She smiled, a placid, unknowing expression that was now grotesque. "Good. You've earned your rest." That night I learned the true meaning of silence. Lying in the darkness of our bedroom, the space that had been my sanctuary for 4 decades, every tick of the clock was a hammer blow. Helen slept beside me, her breathing even and deep. The sound that had once been a comfort was now the rhythm of betrayal. How many nights had she laid here? Her mind filled with Marcus Thorne, with Daniel's calculated advice, with plans to dismantle my life's work. The impulse to shake her awake, to scream the words from the screen into her face, was a physical force. I clenched my fists under the covers until my knuckles ached, anchoring myself to the pain. Rage was a fire, but an architect does not work with fire. An architect works with plans. A chaotic demolition would only leave rubble. I needed a controlled implosion. My mind, trained to see stress points and structural weaknesses, began to work. The painting from Marcus's gallery, an abstract piece I had privately considered overpriced and pretentious, was not an investment. It was a transaction. Daniel's eagerness to review the sale contract was not familial support. It was reconnaissance. Every act of kindness, every thoughtful gesture from the past year, replayed in my mind, now tainted, twisted into evidence of a conspiracy. They had been studying my blueprints, looking for a way to dynamite the load-bearing walls. But they had made a mistake. They had underestimated the man who drew those blueprints in the first place. They saw a 65-year-old man ready for pasture, not the formidable architect who had stared down city planners and union bosses. By dawn, the raw chaotic grief had cooled and hardened into something else. It had taken the shape of resolve. I couldn't do this alone. I needed an ally, someone on the inside. And there was only one person who loved the Morgan legacy as much as I did. But trusting her would mean putting her in an impossible position, forcing her to choose between her father and her husband. It was a terrible risk. It was the only move I had left. The cavernous halls of the Art Institute felt both comforting and mocking. I stood before a massive surratt, a world of perfect ordered dots creating a serene whole. My own life, once just as meticulously composed, had become a chaotic smear. The smell of dust and old oil paint was thick in the air, a scent of permanence that my own world now lacked. For 2 days I had moved through my house like a ghost, exchanging hollow pleasantries with Helen, each smile a feat of structural engineering. Laura arrived exactly on time, her sensible walking shoes making soft sounds on the polished floor. She had my thoughtful eyes, but her mother's smile. A wave of guilt washed over me for what I was about to do for the serene world I was about to shatter for her. "Dad," she said, kissing my cheek. "It's been a while. How's retirement planning going?" "It's progressing," I managed. "How's Ben? Is he enjoying kindergarten?" We made small talk for a few minutes, discussing my grandson's latest artistic creations and her work archiving old city records. But a nervous energy hummed beneath my words, a tension she quickly sensed. She stopped in front of a stark geometric Mondrian, painting her brow furrowed. "Dad, what's wrong? You haven't looked at a single painting since I got here." This was it. My throat felt tight. "Laura, I asked you here because I need to show you something, and I need you to look at it not as a wife or a daughter, but as an archivist. I need you to look at the evidence." The word evidence hung in the quiet air between us. I led her to a stone bench in the center of the gallery and pulled out my phone. My hands felt unsteady as I opened the message thread. I didn't say a word. I just handed it to her. I watched her face the most painful act of observation in my life. First came confusion, her eyes scanning the names, her mother, her husband. Then came disbelief. This is a joke, right? Some kind of misunderstanding, Daniel wouldn't." Her voice trailed off as she kept scrolling, reading the cold clinical exchange about asset division, about the timing of the sale, about me. The color drained from her face. Her hand trembled, the phone clutched in a grip so tight I feared it would crack. She read through the entire thread twice, her archivist's mind processing, cataloging, cross-referencing the lies. The final piece of evidence was the short celebratory exchange between her mother and Marcus Thorne. She looked up from the screen, and the hurt in her eyes was hardening into something else, something cold and sharp like fractured glass. It was a look I recognized. It was the look of a Morgan. "They didn't just betray you, Dad," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper that cut through the gallery's silence. "They betrayed our family's legacy. We're going to document every lie, and we're going to build a case so solid that they'll wish they had never heard the name Morgan." Leaving the Art Institute with Laura had felt like signing a new kind of contract, one sealed not with ink, but with shared purpose. For the rest of the week, we operated in quiet concert. Laura began her discreet archival of Daniel's digital life, while I played the role of the devoted husband, blissfully unaware, counting down the hours to my supposed retirement. Every shared meal was a performance. Every polite kiss Helen gave me was a cold reminder of the task ahead. On Thursday morning, I found myself in an elevator ascending to the 34th floor of a stark anonymous skyscraper in the Loop. The Office of Feral Investigations was the antithesis of my own study. It was sterile, impersonal, decorated in shades of gray and chrome. There were no family photos, no personal artifacts, only a framed law degree and a view of the sprawling city I had helped to build. This was a place for secrets and unpleasant truths. David Farrell was a man in his late 50s with tired eyes that missed nothing. He didn't offer platitudes or false sympathy. He simply gestured to a leather chair and waited. "Mr. Morgan," he began, his voice calm and even. "Your call was discreet. How can I help you?" I placed a single sheet of paper on his polished desk. It contained two names, Helen Morgan and Marcus Thorne. "I require documentation," I said, my own voice sounding as cool and detached as the room around me. "Photographic and financial. I need a complete, irrefutable record of their association outside of a professional context." Farrell studied the paper, then looked at me. "You understand, this process requires patience. If they are careful, it can take time." "They are not careful," I stated. "They are arrogant. They believe they are invisible." I thought of Helen's easy lies, of Daniel's confident smile. They had been living in a structure with no one inspecting the foundation. "And your objective?" Farrell asked, his gaze steady. "Evidence," I said simply. "For a divorce proceeding, my wife is conspiring with my son-in-law to divest me of my assets upon the sale of my company. Her affair is a component of that conspiracy. I need leverage." The words were cold, clinical, a diagnosis of a terminal disease. He nodded slowly. "Understood. My fee is $500 an hour plus expenses. I'll require a $10,000 retainer to begin." I pulled a checkbook from my coat, wrote the check without hesitation, and pushed it across the desk. "Money is no object, Mr. Farrell. Discretion and thoroughness are everything. I want to know where they go, what they spend, and who they see. I want a timeline so detailed that no lawyer in this city can dispute it." He took the check and the paper, placing them neatly in a new manila folder. The simple action felt like a gavel falling. "I'll have my first report for you within 72 hours. We shook hands, a firm professional grip. As I walked out of his office and back into the noise of the city, I felt no sadness, only the cold calculus of a man with a project to manage. The foundation of my life was cracked beyond repair. Now it was time to formally survey the damage. Waiting was not a passive act. It was the tense, calculated stillness of a structure bearing an unexpected load. For 2 days I heard nothing from Farrell. The silence was a void that my own anxious thoughts rushed to fill. I sketched designs that went nowhere, read books without absorbing a word, and watched the city lights flicker on each evening, each one a tiny nerve ending in a system on the verge of collapse. My concern for Laura was a constant, low-grade fever. She was behind enemy lines, armed with only her intellect and my trust. My phone buzzed on the desk late Saturday afternoon, a discreet vibration that still made me jump. It was Laura. I answered on the first buzz. "Dad," her voice was a hushed whisper, sharp with adrenaline. "Laura, are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm fine." "I'm in his home office," she breathed. "Daniel's out playing golf with a client. He thinks I'm organizing our tax receipts for the accountant. He loves when I handle the domestic paperwork." The scorn in her voice was palpable. "I have about an hour." A cold knot tightened in my gut. "Don't take any unnecessary risks. Just look, don't touch anything you can't explain." "Too late for that," she said. "I'm looking at a folder on his private server labeled M&A Contingency. It's a blueprint, Dad. A complete blueprint for the demolition." I heard the faint click of a camera phone in the background. "He's drafted Motion's asset division spreadsheets. He's even calculated the depreciation on your personal art collection." Each word was a precise, clean strike. This wasn't just a plan. It was a forensic accounting of my life conducted by my own son-in-law. What else? I asked, my own voice low and strained. Timelines, she whispered urgently. Notes. Dad, this wasn't a recent idea. The earliest file date is from over a year ago, right after you first mentioned selling the firm at your birthday party. The memory hit me like a physical blow. That celebration, the toasts to my career, the smiling family photos, all of it had been a lie, a carefully constructed facade to hide the rot spreading underneath. Daniel hadn't just seized an opportunity. He had cultivated it, nurtured it, planned its growth with the patient malevolence of a cancer. Laura, get what you can and get out of there, I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. Send it through a secure channel. Then delete everything from your end. Be smart. I'm always smart, she replied, a hint of her old confidence returning. He won't find a trace. Talk soon. The line went dead. I sat in the echoing silence of my study, the city lights now seeming cold and distant. The betrayal was deeper, older, and more methodical than I could have ever imagined. Laura's report from the field had changed everything. This wasn't just a crime of passion or greed. This was premeditated, and the evidence she was gathering would be the cornerstone of my case against them. The digital files from Laura were a cold, hard architecture of deceit. I had spent Sunday morning cross-referencing Daniel's notes with my own calendar, the sickening realization dawning that every family milestone of the past year had been a backdrop for their conspiracy. While I was focused on the legacy I would leave them, they were focused on the assets they would take. The grief was a low, constant pressure behind my ribs, but my mind was clear, focused on the next phase of construction. On Monday morning, as promised, a secure email appeared in my inbox. The sender was simply Farrell. There was no subject line. The body of the email contained a single sentence. Report 1 attached. Password is your mother's maiden name. The clinical detachment was almost a professional courtesy. I opened the encrypted file. It was not a narrative of betrayal. It was a dispassionate catalog of it. The document was organized by date, time, and location. There were scans of credit card receipts from restaurants I'd never heard of, always for two. There were check-in confirmations from the Peninsula Hotel, always on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, times when Helen was supposedly at her book club or a charity luncheon. Then there were the photographs. They were high resolution, taken from a distance, but perfectly clear. The first one showed Helen leaving a small, elegant bistro in Lincoln Park, her hand intertwined with a man's. He was tall, younger, dressed in the kind of expensive, artfully casual clothing that screams money and confidence. I scrolled down. The next photo was of them looking at a painting through a gallery window. His gallery, Marcus Thorne's gallery. Another photo showed them laughing at an outdoor cafe, their heads close together over a shared bottle of wine. Helen's face was animated in a way I hadn't seen in years, a vibrant, carefree expression reserved for him, not for me. The final image was the most damning. It was taken at night outside the entrance to the hotel. Marcus was leaning in his hand on her cheek, and she was turning her face up to his. It wasn't a kiss, but the intimate, undeniable prelude to one. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't feel rage or a fresh wave of grief. I felt a profound, chilling clarity, the way an architect feels when a complex structural problem finally resolves itself into a simple, brutal equation. I sent the entire file to my large format printer. One by one, the glossy 8x10 emerged, capturing the moments of my wife's secret life. I took them to my drafting table and laid them out under the bright task light, arranging them in chronological order. They were no longer just photographs. They were evidence. Exhibits A, B, and C in the case against the woman I had loved for 40 years. Alongside Laura's documents, the full picture was now terrifyingly complete. We met on a Sunday afternoon at a quiet bench overlooking the Lincoln Park Lagoon. The autumn air was crisp, and families strolled past, their laughter carried on the wind. The sheer crushing normalcy of it all felt like a scene from another man's life. Laura arrived looking pale but determined, a small, nondescript laptop bag slung over her shoulder. We didn't waste time with pleasantries. I handed her the manila envelope from Farrell. She handed me a slim USB drive. It was a silent, solemn exchange of ammunition. She opened the envelope and laid the photographs out on the bench between us. I watched her face as she looked at the images of her mother with Marcus Thorne. There was no shock, only a deep, weary sadness that quickly hardened into resolve. She examined each photo with the detached precision of an archivist authenticating a document. "Farrell is good," she said quietly, her voice flat. These are clear time-stamped. Irrefutable. She tapped a finger on a picture of Helen and Marcus laughing over wine. She looks happy. Yes, I said. She does. The files I sent you are worse, she continued, looking up from the photos. The conspiracy is worse than the affair. The affair is just a symptom of the disease. The earliest file date was a year ago, I stated, repeating the fact that had haunted me for days. Worse, she corrected. I found fragments in a deleted cache. He started researching ways to structure a hostile asset seizure nearly 18 months ago, right after you mentioned at Thanksgiving that you were considering your exit strategy. He wasn't just reacting to the sale, Dad. He may have pushed for it subtly through Mom. The coldness of the calculation was breathtaking. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had architected my downfall for the better part of 2 years. So we have it all. I said, more to myself than to her. The financial motive, the legal framework, the personal betrayal. We have the complete blueprints. Laura stacked the photos and slid them back into the envelope. What's our next move? We take this to a lawyer. We file. It will be a messy public battle. I shook my head. Number not yet. A legal filing is impersonal. This was personal. Before I hand this over to the lawyers, I want them to know that we know. I want to see their faces when the structure they built comes down on top of them. Laura looked at me, her eyes searching mine. You want a confrontation. I want a tribunal, I corrected, and I want to be the one to present the evidence. She was silent for a long moment, watching a sailboat drift across the lagoon. Then a slow, grim smile touched her lips. I know the perfect venue, she said. Thanksgiving dinner. Mom is already planning it. She wants to celebrate the sale of the firm, the future of the family. The irony dripped from her words like poison. What better time to discuss the family's future than on the one day a year dedicated to gratitude and togetherness? I looked at my daughter, my partner, my ally. The little girl I had taught to build things with Legos had grown into a woman who understood instinctively how to orchestrate a demolition. Thanksgiving it is, I agreed. The following week was an exercise in controlled observation. I watched Helen as an architect inspects a building slated for demolition, noting every crack in the facade, every sign of structural weakness. She moved through her days with a serene, unshakable confidence, planning charity events and lunching with friends, utterly convinced of her own cleverness. The arrogance was her fatal flaw. It was time to test it. On Wednesday evening, I found her in the kitchen, humming as she reviewed a cookbook. The scene was so painfully domestic it felt like a stage play. I leaned against the doorframe, holding a few printed credit card statements. Helen, I began, my tone carefully calibrated to sound more weary than accusatory. I was just looking over our expenses. Some of these charges from the last few months seem unusually high. She glanced over from her book, her smile not faltering in the slightest. Hi, dear, how so? Well, there's a recurring charge for a spa on Michigan Avenue that comes to nearly $3,000 a month. And this purchase from a jewelry boutique I don't recognize. I let the sentence hang in the air. Her expression shifted not to guilt, but to a look of patient exasperation, the kind a wife gives a husband who doesn't understand the cost of modern living. Thomas, honestly, after 40 years, do I need permission to take care of myself? Don't I deserve a few nice things? It was a masterful pivot, turning my financial query into an attack on her worth. Of course you do, I backtracked immediately, playing my part. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I was just surprised, that's all. I'm trying to get a better handle on our budget before the sale finalizes. She closed the book and walked toward me, placing a cool hand on my arm. Her eyes were full of practiced concern. You work too hard. You worry too much. We're not having financial problems, are we? Should I cut back? The offer was a brilliant piece of theater, positioning herself as the devoted, self-sacrificing wife. No, no, I said, patting her hand. Don't cut back on anything. You're right. You've earned it. The victory in her eyes was subtle, but I saw it. She believed she had managed me, doused the small fire of my suspicion with her practiced charm. Thank you for understanding, she said, her smile returning to its full wattage. In fact, I continued pressing my advantage. I was thinking with the deal closing, we should do something special. Properly celebrate. Why don't we host Thanksgiving this year? A real, old-fashioned family feast for Laura, Daniel, and little Ben. Her face lit up a genuine, unforced delight that was almost chilling. Thomas, what a wonderful idea. I was hoping you'd suggest it. It will be the perfect way to celebrate our new beginning. Perfect, I agreed, my own smile, feeling like a mask of plaster. You handle the menu. I'll handle the wine. She turned back to her cookbooks, already lost in plans for turkey and pies, completely unaware that I was planning a menu of my own, a carefully selected serving of consequences with a main course of cold, hard truth. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were a masterclass in domestic theater, the house filled with the scents of cinnamon sage and roasting pecans. Helen was in her element, a whirlwind of flawless hospitality. She polished the silver until it gleamed arranged autumnal centerpieces with an artist's eye, and spoke on the phone with friends, her voice bright with excitement about the upcoming family celebration. To any observer, we were the picture of a happy, prosperous family on the cusp of a golden retirement. I played my part with chilling precision. I complimented her cooking. I helped her bring the extra dining chairs up from the basement. I discussed wine pairings for the turkey. Each interaction was a carefully constructed line in a play only I had the full script for. I moved through the beautifully decorated rooms of my home feeling like a stranger, a demolition expert disguised as the architect. On the Tuesday before the dinner, I had a brief, encrypted call with Laura. "Everything is set on your end?" I asked, my voice low as I stood in the quiet solitude of my study. "Yes," she replied, her own voice steady and cool. "Ben is excited to see you. Daniel is looking forward to celebrating your success." I could almost hear the bitter smile in her voice. "He has no idea what's coming." "Are you ready for this?" "Dad, I am," I said. "This isn't about anger anymore, Laura. It's about clarity. It's about restoring the integrity of the design." "The archivist is ready," she said, a quiet affirmation of our pact. "We'll see you on Thursday." The night before Thanksgiving, after Helen was asleep, I went down to my study one last time. Under the bright, clean light of my drafting lamp, I assembled my presentation. I had 2 large black portfolio cases. The first I labeled in my precise architectural script, Project Eleanor. Inside, I placed Farrell's photographs, each one slipped into a clear, protective sleeve, followed by the corresponding financial statements. The second case was labeled Project Daniel. It contained the printouts of the documents Laura had recovered, the asset division spreadsheets, the timelines, the legal motions drafted in anticipation of my ruin. I checked the order of every page. Everything was accounted for. Everything was perfect. It was the most important presentation of my life, a closing argument to be delivered not in a courtroom but at my own dining room table. I closed the cases and placed them against the wall, hidden in plain sight amongst my other architectural portfolios. As I stood there, a strange cold calm washed over me. There was no more anxiety, no more rage. There was only the quiet certainty of a plan about to be executed. The foundations had been surveyed, the charges had been set. All that was left was to push the button. The guests would arrive in a few hours. The performance was about to begin. The doorbell chimed at precisely 4 o'clock. Helen, beaming, swept past me to open it. On the doorstep stood my daughter, my grandson, and the man who had meticulously plotted my ruin. "You're here," Helen cried, enveloping Laura in a hug before turning her glowing smile on Daniel. "Daniel, you look so handsome. Come in, come in. Everything is ready." Daniel stepped inside, handing me a bottle of expensive bourbon. "For you, Thomas," he said, his handshake firm, his eyes clear and confident. "To celebrate the end of an era and the beginning of a new one." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, my voice even. "Let's open it for a toast." My grandson Ben ran to me, and I lifted him into my arms, the solid, innocent weight of him a stark contrast to the hollowness in the room. He smelled like cold air and sugar cookies. For a moment, looking at his trusting face, my resolve wavered. This would destroy his world too. Then I looked over his shoulder at his father, laughing with Helen in the dining room, and the steel returned to my spine. I was doing this to protect Ben's legacy from the man who was supposed to be its guardian. We gathered around the dining table, a perfect portrait of familial bliss. The turkey was golden brown, the crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, and the scent of rosemary and thyme filled the air. Helen was the consummate hostess, Daniel, the charming son-in-law, and Laura, my brilliant, brave daughter, played the part of the dutiful wife flawlessly. Only the occasional fleeting glance she sent my way betrayed the tension coiled beneath her calm exterior. Daniel carved the turkey with a surgeon's precision. "A masterpiece, Helen," he declared. "As always, you and Thomas have built such a wonderful life." "It's an inspiration. We've been very blessed," Helen agreed, patting my hand. After the main course was cleared, Daniel stood, raising his glass of bourbon. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice resonating with sincerity. "To Thomas, a brilliant architect, a shrewd businessman, and a man who has built a legacy that will stand the test of time. We are all so proud of you. And to the future of this family, a future of prosperity and togetherness that you have made possible." To family, Helen echoed, her eyes glistening. We all raised our glasses. I met Laura's eyes across the table. This was it. The moment had arrived. I drank the bourbon, the burn in my throat a welcome fire. I set the glass down and dabbed my lips with a napkin. Thank you, Daniel, I said, my voice calm. That was beautifully said. Now, if you'll all excuse me, I'll get dessert ready. I have a special presentation I think you'll all find illuminating. I returned to the dining room not with a pumpkin pie, but with the 2 black portfolio cases. I placed them on the end of the table with a soft, definitive thud that cut through the lingering dinner conversation. The air shifted instantly. The warm, festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp chill. Thomas, what on earth is this? Helen asked, a nervous laugh in her voice. This doesn't look like dessert. Daniel frowned, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. He recognized the cases for what they were, tools of a formal presentation. Dad, what's going on? I remained standing at the head of the table, a judge at his bench. The main course is finished, I said, my voice devoid of all warmth. Now it is time for the accounting. We toasted to legacy and family. I thought it would be appropriate to review the actual state of our family's assets, both financial and moral. I opened the first case, the one labeled Project Eleanor. I reached inside and pulled out the first 8x10 photograph, placing it in the center of the table next to the remains of the floral centerpiece. It was the picture of Helen and Marcus Thorne, hand in hand, leaving the bistro. A sharp gasp escaped Helen's lips. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly pale mask. Where did you get that? She stammered, her hand flying to her throat. I hired a professional, I answered calmly. I laid out another photograph, Helen and Marcus laughing over wine, and another, the 2 of them outside the hotel. I let the images lie there, a silent, damning testimony. The documentation is, as you can imagine, quite thorough. Daniel stared at the photos, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. He was realizing the foundation of his own plan had just been dynamited. This isn't just about infidelity, Helen, I continued, my voice cold and precise. I reached back into the portfolio and retrieved the financial statements. I spread them out next to the photographs. This is about funding. $3,000 a month to a spa for treatments. $5,000 for a watch from a boutique I've never heard of. Over $50,000 in unexplained expenses in the last 6 months alone. I tapped the final receipt. All while you were planning to take half of my life's work. Helen shook her head, her eyes wide with panic. Thomas, please, it's not what it looks like. I can explain. There will be time for explanations, I said, cutting her off. But first, we have one more presentation. I closed the first portfolio and turned my gaze cold and deliberate to my son-in-law. Your turn, Daniel. Daniel's mask of charming confidence was cracking, flaking away to reveal the panicked opportunist beneath. He pushed his chair back slightly, an instinctive move to create distance. Thomas, I don't know what photos you've found, but this is a private marital issue. As your lawyer, I advise. You are not my lawyer, I cut him off, my voice sharp as broken glass. You are my target. I opened the second portfolio, Project Daniel. The affair was merely a symptom. The disease, Daniel, is your greed. I didn't spread the documents out like the photographs. I held up the top sheet, a spreadsheet. This is a detailed projection of asset division upon the sale of my firm. My assets, my firm. Your projected legal fees seem to be quite substantial. 40% of the liquid assets, to be precise. His face went ashen. That's a hypothetical document. A strategic exercise to prepare for any eventuality. Really, I tossed the spreadsheet onto the table. It landed next to a photo of his mother-in-law kissing her lover. And I suppose these timelines are also hypothetical. The ones dating back 18 months. The ones detailing how to leverage Helen's cooperation to ensure a swift, favorable settlement. I let the pages fall one after another. These are not strategies, Daniel. These are the blueprints of my ruin drafted by you. He turned to his wife, his last possible ally. Laura, this is insane. Your father is having some kind of breakdown. You know how much I respect him, how much I've tried to help. It was then that Laura, silent until now, spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through his desperate pleading with the chilling finality of a closing door. He didn't find those documents, Daniel, she said. I did. Daniel stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. The shock on his face was absolute. Laura, I photographed them myself, she continued, her gaze unwavering. In your office, from your server, while you were out playing golf and I was at home organizing the domestic paperwork. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked over to where Ben was sitting, his eyes wide with confusion, and gently took his hand. She looked back at her husband. "You didn't just try to steal from my father," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You tried to steal my son's heritage. You used our family as a smokescreen for a heist." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were demolition charges. She turned and walked towards the foyer, holding Ben's hand tightly. At the doorway, she paused and looked back, not at Daniel, but at me. "My father built homes," she said. "You tried to destroy one." Then she was gone. A moment later, the heavy front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the ruined dining room. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable end. The demolition was complete. The silence that followed the slam of the door was heavier than stone. It filled the room, pressing down on the three of us left amidst the rubble of our family. The beautifully roasted turkey sat cold and forgotten. The scattered photographs lay like casualties on the fine linen tablecloth. This was no longer a dining room. It was the site of a demolition. Daniel was the first to move. He scraped his chair back, his movements jerky and panicked. His lawyer's mind was clearly calculating the sheer scale of his professional and personal ruin. "This is a family matter," he sputtered, fumbling for his car keys. "A private dispute. I'm leaving." "You can leave my house," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of iron. "But you can't leave the consequences." He froze his hand on the back of his chair. I met his eyes. "The documents Laura photographed will be sent to the Illinois State Bar Association tomorrow morning, along with a formal complaint." "You conspired to defraud a client, Daniel. Even if that client is your father-in-law, your career is over." He stared at me, the last of his composure shattering. He didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked quickly out of the room, out of the house, out of our lives. The front door closed with a soft click, this time the sound of a coward's retreat. Now it was just the two of us, Helen and I alone in the wreckage of 40 years. Tears were streaming down her face, silent, desperate tracks on her ruined composure. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Honey, please. We can fix this." Fix this. I looked around the room at the evidence of her lies laid bare. "There is nothing to fix, Helen. You don't repair a building that has been intentionally dynamited. You clear the rubble and start over." "It was Daniel," she cried, her voice rising in a last desperate attempt at manipulation. "He manipulated me. He convinced me you were going to leave me with nothing after the sale. I was scared. You were greedy." I corrected, my voice flat, devoid of the anger that had burned for weeks. It was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "You weren't scared when you were dining with Marcus. You weren't scared when you were accepting expensive gifts. You weren't scared when you were lying to my face day after day." She stood up and took a hesitant step toward me, her hands outstretched. 40 years, Thomas. It has to count for something. Don't throw it all away. Give me a second chance." I looked at her, at the woman I had shared a life with, and I felt nothing. The love had been excavated, leaving only an empty space. "The woman I married wouldn't have needed a second chance," I said. I began methodically gathering the photographs and documents, placing them back into their portfolios. "The work was done. You should call a lawyer, Helen. You're going to need a very good one." I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing amongst the ruins of the life she had so carelessly destroyed. The Monday after Thanksgiving felt like the first day of a new year. The sky over Chicago was a brilliant, cloudless blue, scrubbed clean by a cold front. I walked into the lobby of a skyscraper on Wacker Drive, the two black portfolios held firmly in one hand. The air inside the offices of Williams and Price attorneys at law was hushed and smelled of money and polished wood. James Williams was a man whose stillness was his primary weapon. He didn't waste time on small talk, simply gestured for me to sit in the leather chair opposite his vast mahogany desk. His corner office offered a panoramic view of the city. I loved a landscape of steel and glass I knew intimately. I did not offer a lengthy explanation. I simply placed the two black portfolios on his desk and said 40 years of marriage, a conspiracy between my wife and my son-in-law to defraud me of my assets. The evidence is in those cases. Williams opened Project Eleanor first. He examined each photograph, his expression unchanging. He scanned the financial statements, his eyes moving quickly, absorbing the data. He then opened Project Daniel, spending more time on the legal documents, his focus intense. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. After 20 minutes of complete silence, he closed the second portfolio and folded his hands on top of it. "In my 30 years of practice, Mr. Morgan," he began, his voice calm and measured, "I have rarely seen a case so thoroughly and methodically documented by a plaintiff. This is an attorney's dream." "So the case is strong," I stated. He gave a slight humorless smile. Strong is not the word I would use. Ironclad is more appropriate. The evidence of adultery is absolute, which gives you significant leverage in asset division. But the conspiracy, that changes everything. An officer of the court conspiring against a family member. The judge will not be lenient. And Daniel's career, I asked. Over Williams said without hesitation. The moment we file a formal complaint with the state bar with this evidence, his license to practice law in this state is finished. He'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges for fraud. He paused. As for your wife, she will walk away with the bare minimum the law allows. The business, the properties, the retirement accounts, they are all safe. This isn't a legal battle, Mr. Morgan. It's a legal certainty. He leaned forward, his professional demeanor softening for just a fraction of a second. You've built an unbreakable case. My job now is simply to file the paperwork and watch it execute. I stood up and shook his hand. That's all I ask. I walked out of the towering glass and steel building and onto the bustling street below. The portfolio cases were still in his office. The weight of them was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine set in motion. Laura's apartment was a quiet haven of order and light, a space that reflected her personality completely. Books were arranged by subject, and the afternoon sun streamed through a large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight in my chest felt a little lighter. Ben was at a friend's house, leaving just the two of us. We sat at her small kitchen table, mugs of tea, warming our hands. We didn't speak of the Thanksgiving dinner, nor of the legal papers that were now being served. The demolition was over. This was the first day of reconstruction. I filed this morning, Laura said, her voice soft but steady. For divorce. Daniel's lawyer has already been in touch. Williams filed my petition yesterday, I replied. It's out of our hands now. It's just a process. She nodded, tracing the rim of her mug. How are you, Dad? Really? I considered the question for a long moment. I feel quiet, I finally said. The anger is gone. It burned itself out. Now there's just a great empty space where 40 years of my life used to be. I looked at her, my daughter, my steadfast ally. But the space isn't entirely empty. You're still there. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. I'm sorry for my part in it all. For not seeing what he was. For believing. You have nothing to be sorry for, I interrupted gently. We were both betrayed by people we trusted. But their betrayal doesn't get to be the final word on our family's story. I reached across the table and took her hand. Laura, I have never been prouder of you than I was on Thanksgiving night. You showed a strength I didn't even know you possessed. I learned it from you, she whispered. I thought about what you always said about buildings. A structure is only as strong as its core. Our core is strong, I affirmed. You, me, and Ben. That's the core. The rest was just ornamentation. I thought about my firm, my legacy of glass and steel towers. For months I was obsessed with protecting my legacy, but I was wrong about what that legacy is. It isn't a company. It isn't a collection of buildings. What is it then, she asked. It's Ben, I said, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the tea. It's the values we passed down to him. Honesty, integrity, the strength to tear things down when they are rotten and build something better in their place. That's the Morgan legacy. She squeezed my hand, a real genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. It was the first ray of light after a very long storm. That sounds like a blueprint I can get behind, she said. 6 months later, the legal proceedings concluded with the clean, impersonal efficiency James Williams had promised. The divorce was finalized. Helen walked away with a fraction of what she had plotted to steal her reputation, in the city's social circles shattered. Daniel Price was formally disbarred by the state of Illinois, his name now a cautionary tale in the legal community. Justice, I found, was not a fiery explosion, but the quiet, methodical process of things being set right. I sold the large house on the Gold Coast, its rooms too full of ghosts and gilded lies. I now live in a modern downtown condo with a view of Millennium Park. It's a space designed for a future, not a monument to a past. My new life, like my best architectural work, is built on a foundation of honesty and purpose. For months I was obsessed with protecting my legacy. But I was wrong about what that legacy truly is. It isn't a company nor a collection of skyscrapers piercing the clouds. My real legacy is in my daughter's resilient smile and in my grandson's carefree joy. I hadn't retired. Instead, I established the Morgan Foundation, a trust dedicated to providing scholarships for bright, underprivileged students of architecture. My new work isn't about building monuments of steel for the wealthy, but about laying the foundations for the next generation of builders. I learned that a second chance doesn't mean getting back what you lost. It means building something new and more meaningful with the wisdom you've gained. My story began in a perfect study in a life that seemed impeccably designed. It began with the belief in a solid foundation. That foundation proved to be faulty, and the demolition was painful. But it is only after the rubble is cleared that you have the chance to build something true, something with integrity. The strongest structures are not those that never face damage, but those that can be rebuilt better and more honestly than before. What a journey we've shared today. Stories like Thomas Morgan's remind us that the strongest foundations are not made of stone or steel, but of honesty and love. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.